Let me say again, it's just a joy to be with you. Don't think that this is the last time you'll see us. We're going to come back, and because we love to be with people that are like you guys. I have always liked to hike, and even when I was young, so my brothers would take me also with them. One time we went to a gorge, and we hiked up the gorge, and that was fantastic, except that it was covered with poison ivy. And so I got poison ivy all over me. Ever since then, I've been afraid. Almost terrified, not quite, but afraid of poison ivy. I still like to hike. And I was in Georgia over the last summer, and I was hiking, and I came around a corner, and the path was lined with poison ivy on both sides. I kind of withdrew within to myself, like this. Just at that moment, a young man came around the corner and saw me. He had compassion on me. He thought that I was afraid of him. He said, "Oh, it's okay. You can pass." Now, you may be wondering how in the world this is a link to a talk on friendship evangelism. But it is this. I think that most people feel about evangelism the same way as I feel about poison ivy. Okay, so let's move that on. Okay, move that screen ahead. Okay. And one more. So, now the reason that I want to talk about evangelism with non-believers today is because we've been doing this, Patsy and I, for about 30 years now, and we think it's fun. And the reason that we think it's fun is we pursue people and they become our friends, and then we invite them to study the Bible with us. And that's been really good. Now, before I talk about how we pursue people as friends, I want to talk about friendship in the Bible. C.S. Lewis talks about it in The Four Loves, and he says, friendship should be a central meal among those loves, but it's not. It's like a side dish. So I want to look at in the scriptures, what does it talk about friendship? Well, the Old Testament, God is the friend of Abraham. Abraham is God's friend, okay? And then, next slide. If you look at John 15, let me read this to you. This is the last week that Jesus is here, okay, on earth, and he's talking to his disciples, and he says this: "Greater love has no one than this, that they lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends, for everything I learned from the Father I have made known to you." Okay, another slide. And you remember that Jesus was talking to the Pharisees, and Jesus said to the Pharisees that they called him a friend of tax collectors, a friend of sinners, a friend. Okay? Now, they meant it as a slander. He didn't see it that way. So we have those three things: the friendship between us and God, like we sing a hymn, "What a friend we have in Jesus." Friendship between us and non-believers, and friendship between us and other Christians. Now, here's some ideas about pursuing friends. Next slide. Yeah, there in the gray house, that's our house in Shaker Heights. And right next to it were neighbors named Chris and Paige. Well, next slide. So when I met Chris, I asked the WH questions. Why do we call them WH? Well, they begin with WH. And when we teach English, we use this. And these are really good questions when you meet someone. Hi, I'm Craig. What's your name? Where are you from? What do you do? Where do you work? What do you do exactly? How do you like it? So these are great introductory questions. Well, Chris and Paige became our friends, and then they asked us to go to their house in the woods for a weekend, and we did that. And then one day, I just out of the blue, I asked him, would you like to study the Bible with me? Come to think of it, when I asked Patsy to marry me, I did the same thing. No conversation about the relationship at all. I just said, will you marry me? And she said, what? But when I asked Chris to marry me, Chris said, okay, or not, no, I was wrong. When I have had fear that I might say that. When I asked Chris to study the Bible with me, he said, okay. And we started studying. Every Saturday we would get together and we would go over the book of John. And after about 3 months, he said, it's not baptism that saves me. It's faith in Jesus. Okay, so the next slide's there. Good. Now, I heard a statistic yesterday on Moody Broadcasting. It said 60% of young adults will say yes if you ask them to study the Bible with you. Now, that's pretty amazing, isn't it? And we have asked a ton of people to study the Bible with us. Mostly they say yes. Sometimes they say no. Roger was also a neighbor, and I asked him the WH questions. I asked him other questions. It turned out he was a bicycle rider, so I rode bicycles with him. One day I said, a little better now, on doing this a little smoother, I said, I like to study the Bible with friends. Would you be interested? He said, no. We continued to ride the bicycles together. When I came back from furlough, I went over there and saw him. Why would I continue when he was not interested? Because our friendship was genuine. And next slide. I think that Christians can be the best friends, can be the most genuine friends. Why would that be? Well, when we know who God is and we know how he loves us, that forms this huge part of our identity, how we view ourselves. How we view ourselves does not come from what we think about ourselves. It doesn't come from what other people think about us. It comes from what Jesus thinks about us. And that allows us not to be so self-absorbed. We can think and focus on others, and that is a recipe for great friendship. Okay. Next slide. So, okay. I don't know whether you can read that. Can you? Let me read it to you. Active listening, responding to someone with the facts and feelings that they have just used in talking to us. Okay, so this is a way of conversation. You use the WH questions, then you use other questions, and you respond to them. You don't just sit there like that. Now, next slide. Dr. Cipone is a friend of mine. He's on my right, he'll be your left, okay? He's an OBGYN doctor, and this is in Laos. And we started studying the chronological Bible stories together. After about a half a year, he started telling me his problems. He said, I'm a drinker. I drink a lot. It makes me tired. I can't spend as much time with my family as I want, and it's expensive. He told me this 3 times in a row. He needed to hear me respond to him. So I said, this is a hard problem for you. It's expensive. You're tired all the time. You don't have time with your family. He said, exactly. Okay. Next slide. This is a bunch of questions. Now, you probably have others, but all of these questions are good. After you get to know someone, they're useful as secondary questions. We use these when we teach English as a second language. I was studying with Dr. Somleet, the head of the ICU, and I asked him, Dr. Somleet, what do you remember as the happiest memory from your childhood? He said, well, we would go to the temple, and there would be a seance at the temple, and they would be calling back people from the dead, and there would be music, and I would dance and dance in the middle of that seance. I was so happy. Now, when a friend tells you something like that, it's a little strange, isn't it? You don't just drop it. You respond with active listening. Wow, Dr. Somleet, that sounds like a great time. There was there was music, and the temple was there, and it was a comfortable place for you, and you were dancing. That sounds like a really happy memory. Okay. So the next slide. Now, you may not think that you're able to do this, that you're not qualified or not good at it. And before I became a Christian, I definitely had very poor skills in friendship making. But you know what? It is God that does this. Let me read this passage from 2 Corinthians 3. Such confidence is ours through Christ before God. Not that we are competent in ourselves to claim anything for ourselves, but our competence comes from God. He has made us competent as ministers of a new covenant. Now, Paul is talking about his ministry, his disciple making to the church in Corinth, and this is the basis. It is not us that makes us competent to do this sharing of Jesus and his life with others. It is him who has done that. Okay. Now, what if you've decided on a friend and is this going to fall off? Uh-oh. I might just have to hold it here. Okay, so you've decided on a friend, and you've asked the WH questions. You've asked some of these secondary questions. You've used active listening, and they ask you, who did you vote for? Now, you may think that's a WH question, but it is not. Okay? Next slide. I would encourage you to use the admonitions from the Bible. Here's one from 2 Timothy. It should be before that. There's one slide before that. Is it not there? Okay, just leave it there for the moment. Oh, there it is. Okay. Don't have anything to do with foolish and stupid arguments because because you know they produce quarrels, and the Lord's servant must not quarrel. Instead, he must be kind to everyone. And this from Proverbs 20, it is to one's honor to avoid strife, but every fool is quick to quarrel. Okay, next slide. Now, this is a slide of the brain. I guess you knew that already. It's cut sagittally like this and opened up. And the thing about the brain that is, in general, the mid part of the brain is for feelings and the outside is for thoughts. Now, you see that green part, and it's labeled amygdala. The amygdala is thought to be the center where fear and threat is processed. So, if someone is about to hit you, the amygdala in the center of the brain lights up, and the cortex on the outside dims. You do not think, you run. The same is true when someone asks you or me, who did you vote for? My amygdala lights up. You know, I don't think. Now, what that's called is amygdala hijack. And it is during amygdala hijack that we say things that we shouldn't. Yeah, we quarrel, we argue. Okay? So back to our friend. Next slide. Back to our friend who has just asked us, who did you vote for? Or some other question that's like you don't want to answer. You know, you don't want to argue. This is what you can say. I'd rather not go there, if that's okay. Now, don't be rough. I'd rather not go there. You know, no, gentle, if that's okay. Okay. Now, sometimes they will continue and push. Now, manipulation is pressuring someone to change. That's manipulation. And if the person that you've just said, if that's okay, continues to pressure, then you may have a bully on your hand. Now, I'm not suggesting that you move into unhealthy relationships. Remember, it's you that are doing the pursuing. You can drop the pursuit. Yeah. Okay. The next slide. And another thing, you know the verse, do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character. People will often say, you become like your friends in 5 years. And that's kind of a reflection of what this verse is talking about. Now, you become like your friends in good ways and in bad ways. When I was in Laos, I would go on a biking team. Next slide. Now, these are some of my biking team. We've got about 20 on the team, and we get up at whatever in the morning on Saturdays, and we're on the road at 6 in the morning because it's hot there. You don't want to go in the afternoon. So we pedal out of the city about 15 or 20 miles. We stop. We eat breakfast, eggs and bread, and then we turn around and pedal back to the city. And we stop again and have coffee together and talk. We spend an hour and a half talking and an hour and a half biking. Now, when I came back to the States, I biked with my brother, and we got on our bikes and we biked, and then he said, bye-bye, and that was it. I felt wronged. I had changed. These non-believing friends of mine had changed me for the better. Now, that sometimes happens and sometimes it doesn't. Remember that that in our lives as Christians, there's this foundation of the Bible and who Jesus is and our whole universe is like way different. So it's really important that if we're going to pursue non-believing friends and be a little closer to them, that we need to make use of those means of grace, prayer, talking to God, being in fellowship, memorizing Scripture, fasting. All of these things need to be part of who we are. Otherwise, it's going to pull us out of and away from Jesus. Next slide. Okay. When you look for friends, it's a good idea to look for noble-hearted people. This comes from that parable that Jesus had where the good soil is the one that produced 30, 60, 100-fold. Noble means good. Next slide. Next slide. This is Dr. Seng Tong. He's the oncologist that I spoke of earlier. Okay. You know, when I met him, I asked all the questions, and you know, one of the things that I got was that he made house calls. He made house calls on a regular basis. I think I've made 2 house calls in my entire life. This is a noble-hearted person. We became good friends. Next slide. The one in the middle, his name is La. La is a nuclear physicist who works at the radiation department. He adjusts the linear accelerator so that it will provide the right amount of radiation for people who are having cancer treatments. He's fairly educated and smart. So we studied through the whole chronological Bible together. And then we started on another series. He said to me, now remember that he's a nuclear physicist, okay? He said, you know, I think about going back to the village and teaching English there because they don't have anybody in the village. Remember, the village is the place where there's no running water, no electricity. He said to me, you know, knowing you and talking with you, it's made me a better person. One of the things that happens when we meet with non-believers is that life of Jesus gets out and gets into other people. Even as they begin to move toward Jesus, they become more like him. Okay. So next slide. So there you have it. There's one more, a mentor. Pray for your friend, talk with a mentor. I'm 65 years old. Yay. Okay, I'm really happy about that. And I still have a mentor, you know, and what the mentor helps me to do, he's further down the path. He helps me become a better person, more like Jesus. So I encourage you to get a mentor. When you're looking to get a friend who's non-believer, talk with your mentor about it. Get his advice, okay? So use questions, listen, don't forget the question. I love to study the Bible with my friends. Would you be interested? Yeah. Okay, that's it. Thank you so much.